Megalopolis is a epic science fiction film directed by Francis Ford Coppola. This has been a dream project of his since the 70s. It has a really large backstory. He came up for the movie in the 70s, but he was unable to secure funding in the 80s because he had a string of box office disappointments. He's known for funding a couple of films himself, and then if they fail, he owes creditors, so he has to make director for hire films in order to make some money to pay back people that he owes. That was one of the main reasons why he made The Godfather Part 3. He didn't want to, but he was broke at the time. So out of all of his films, I've seen all of his more popular films, but there's about 13 films of his that I have not seen. I've seen the more popular films like The Conversation, the first two, all three Godfather films, and Apocalypse Now, and a few others. I haven't seen some of his earlier work like Tucker or Rumblefish, but this is a passion project. After the 80s, he tried to fund it again in the 90s and early 2000s, but 9/11 happened, so he wasn't able to do that because New York City was the main sort of place for his the movie's about like a larger scale disaster that wrecks the city, so he didn't want to step on the toes of a real life tragedy. And then he sold a chunk of his winery to fund the $120 million film in 2019. Then COVID happened. So it just seems that every time he tries to make something of this film, this dream project of his, something gets in the way. But he finally filmed it in 2021 with a big cast. He couldn't find distribution either, so he had to pay for all the marketing costs, which wasn't very much. But this movie is a big swing and a miss, in my opinion. I'm not going to mince words. Francis Ford Coppola hasn't really been relevant in the last couple decades. His last like mainstream hit was probably the Rainmaker movie, which is an adaptation of a John Grisham novel. And he's only directed 3 films after that, and I haven't seen it's Tetro, Betwixt, and another one. But he hasn't really been active, and he's not really a sci-fi guy. So this movie is a very ambitious project. It's based off of a real Roman political coup that happened in 63 before Christ, I believe. All the names are the same. So our main character is a genius architect and I guess the leader of the design authorities, some sort of large-scale group that's in charge of designing parks for a dystopian city version of New Rome, which is based in the future after a cataclysmic event sort of unifies the United States. New York City becomes New Rome, and everything looks kind of the same, but there are large chunks of the city that are decayed and need to be rebuilt. And Adam Driver plays Caesar Catalina. He is also has the power to stop time. However, that aspect of the film is not really utilized in any meaningful way. He also discovers a new element which he's going to use to build the city, but people are scared of it, and that's also not explained. The science fiction elements of this film are very vague and not really, they feel more like fantasy because they're not really explained. It's just sort of like very vagueness to it. And the Wikipedia article for this movie says that he also came up with a way of just letting his actors improvise and make up dialogue on the spot. Also him changing stuff on the spot, and it pushed away a lot of crew people because they were getting pissed off that he would just change things on the fly for no reason, and it makes a very hard way to film a movie when everything's random. And I think some of that definitely leaks into the final product because there's a lot of performances that don't really feel like they're in the same space, or they're not tonally consistent with each other, awkward dialogue in spots. But anyways, the main story of this movie is Caesar wants to turn the city of New Rome into a megalopolis with his new elements and his, I guess, his vision. However, he's being opposed by Mayor Cicero, who is a corrupt mayor who tried to get him for the death of his of Caesar's wife. And Julia is a sort of socialite who ends up befriending Caesar, and the two of them start working together. And there's also a lot of other subplots. There's Wow Valentina. No. Wow Platinum? I don't even remember, man. I just watched this movie and I forgot. I think her name's Wow Platinum. Played by Aubrey Plaza, and probably one of her most insane roles. But she's like this reporter lady or something who sleeps with Caesar and then goes after his rich uncle and then sneaks her way into that. Shia LaBeouf plays Cloudo. I've already forgotten their names because the movie's so terrible. Cloudo, or Anyways, he is just like, he feels like he's in another movie, to be honest. He's really overacting in every sequence. He just doesn't look right. He speaks what's on his, like what the character wants. It's really weird. There's a lot of weird emotional dissonance in this film. And just characters like speak really what they feel. It's weird. It's almost like amateurish. Anyways, the story is essentially these two lead figureheads are trying to take control of the city. But the heart of the real film, I think, is the relationship between Julia Cicero and her father, the mayor. He represents an old school sort of way of thinking. Just keep the city as it is, get people, you know, homes and stuff, despite the massive amount of homelessness and everything in the city, just sort of sanitation, basic food and necessities, but he's unable to do all that because it's like the disaster zone. And of course, Julia starts to work with Caesar, and she becomes enamored with his vision. So in a way, she sort of sees the future and is willing to change her mind, but keeps clashing with her father. And there's just some plots in there involving takeovers and stuff going on with Caesar's rich uncle. He's like a super multi-billionaire, and that's where he gets most of his power from, funding from the family. But this movie is just, I don't know, just it almost feels like cinematic blue balls at times, especially when it comes to the powers of stopping time from Caesar. The beginning of the film, literally the first sequence of this film is him showing the audience his power, and then he barely uses it throughout the rest of the film. It'd be like watching a Superman movie, and then after the ship lands, Clark finds out he has powers and then doesn't do anything with the powers. He spends 2 hours just doing stuff off screen and having his Jonathan tell him not to use his powers or something like that. And the final shot of the movie is him dressing up as Superman. This movie, it feels like the whole movie's like that. What's the point of the stopping? If you took the stopping time aspect out of the movie, it wouldn't change the movie. Maybe the element is essential to the building of the new city, so that works. But the movie doesn't have that edge to it. It's got some violence and some mob stuff, well, not mob stuff, but like a hit stuff, and that stuff's exciting. There's large patches of just boringness, and Lawrence Fishburne plays a minor character. He's like the chauffeur, maybe bodyguard of Caesar. He narrates the film, and I have nothing against Lawrence Fishburne, you know, his voice or whatever, but too much voiceover makes it really pretentious. This whole movie he has like literally every 10 minutes he has a voiceover, and it just sort of starts to drag you down eventually and becomes wearisome. There's also a large chunk of this movie that just feels weird. I think near the end, like half an hour, the movie just turns into a farce. There's literally like a weird sex scene with exposition, and then a character rushes a fake something, and then the whole movie just rolls into a weird finale that doesn't have any like sort of earned happiness. It just sort of like, oh, everything just turned out for the better, the end. You know, just no overcoming obstacles, no... there's even a character in this movie that's supposed to be important, and they forget about him, so they kill him off in a 5-second flashback, and it's just so awkward. So there are large pieces of this film that have that sort of thing. People have been kind of comparing it to Tommy Wiseau's The Room. It's not that bad. That half hour near the end, like I think around right before the climax, definitely feels like it's turning into The Room. There's even a slow-mo shot of a car running over a jacket. It's just, this movie is just really wild. It's obviously very personal to Coppola, and this was his vision, but I just feel like it might have been better to have someone standing around him to say no, or to rein it in a little bit, because this doesn't really feel like a commercial project. It feels like a $120 million vanity project, and you know, you can do that with your own money. You can do whatever you want with your own money, but it doesn't mean it's going to be good. You know, I mean, I think a lot of people have a creative side where you would love to, you know, make your dream project with a lot of money, or adapt like your favorite fantasy book into a show or a movie, or favorite sci-fi book into a movie or show. And it would be pretty awesome, but there's always going to be someone on the other side saying, okay, you can't do that because that won't work. There are always limits, and if you give someone no limits, then it's just an old filmmaker who's 85, hasn't made a really big movie in like almost 30 years, just doing whatever he wants, experimenting on the fly, improvising on set, having his actors improvise dialogue on. That's just an editing nightmare, to be honest. This movie had a lot of hurdles to get through, and you'd think Coppola would just give it up after the third delay, but this movie is going to be his magnum opus, the last film he makes. It's definitely a shadow of what he used to be, because you can definitely tell that, for example, Apple Studios paid $200 million to have Martin Scorsese make Killers of the Flower Moon. Also Ridley Scott to make Napoleon. They paid for both films, $400 million right there. But Francis Ford Coppola couldn't get an extra $200 million because he's probably not as relevant as those other two. He hasn't been working. He hasn't been proving that he can make a marketable, viable film. So he said, I think way back in the day, that, oh, I'm going to make the movie myself because I don't like being delayed, and forcing it to happen doesn't really mean anything. This movie just feels really awkward at times. There's some weird stuff going on. I mean, I wasn't exactly bored, but I was also confused half the time because I didn't really know what was going on. This movie is just a deeply personal film that from a film director that just feels like a fever dream. It feels like I sat in a room with the director and he just explained to me his awesome vision, but I didn't get it. So I give Megalopolis a 4 out of 10.